My son calls me every night. It sounds impossible until it isn't. A voice I've learned to recognize in the thin scratch of my phone, the same cadence, the same small laugh at the end of a sentence that used to fill our kitchen. He's been gone for 10 years, but every night the call comes. And every night he asks the same thing, quiet and raw. Why did you let them hurt me, Dad? That question is a knife that never dulls. For a long time, I answered with silence. I blame time, bad wiring, grief that tricks a lonely man into hearing echoes. But the calls kept coming, and the question kept arriving like a verdict. Guilt settled in my bones. I replayed the moments I should have acted, the excuses I told myself, the times I chose calm over confrontation. Each one was another reason he stopped trusting the world. Last night I stopped pretending the phone was a ghost. I promised him I would make them pay. Not with violence, but with truth, exposure, and the kind of accountability that public shame and legal consequence can bring. I swore I would pull their comfortable lives apart until the town could no longer look away. And what happened next will leave you speechless. His name was Michael. He was 16 and he kept the kind of light that makes a house feel like a home. Small, steady, ordinary. He loved old movie cameras. Not the expensive kind, but the battered Super 8 my father gave him years back. The one with the tarnished crank that made a comforting whir. He would sit for hours framing shots of the neighborhood. The way the late afternoon hit Mrs. Delaney's apple tree. The way a dog chased its own tail on the corner. Always muttering that someday he'd make a film that mattered. He called it something honest. I used to tell him his honesty would make him a good man. I told myself the same thing back when I wired houses and fixed neighbors' heaters for cash and a cup of coffee. We were a small family stitched together by necessity and stubbornness. Michael's mother died when he was 8. The funeral blurred into the long winter that followed. I learned then to hold 2 jobs, one to pay the bills, one to keep breathing. Michael held on to the things that made grief bearable. A crooked sketchbook, a battered camera, a playlist of songs he hummed while fixing the lens. He was quiet, not fragile. He could be stubborn as any haze. But quiet is easy to mistake for weakness when you have the kind of kids who need to prove themselves loud. High school changed the edges of our days. Not at first. Freshman year was homework and awkward jokes. Then a group found out Michael liked film class more than football. They started calling him names, small at first, like a pebble in a shoe. Annoying, but bearable. Then the pebbles grew sharp. One afternoon, a boy shoved a camera into Michael's hands and told him to perform, to make something funny. They circled him. Someone pushed his backpack over. Someone else yelled a line for the camera. I heard about the joke later, from whispers at work, from a text I dismissed because teenagers are cruel, and then forget. Teen cruelty turned surgical the spring before he died. They recorded him. A trimmed clip meant to look like an accident, a prank, and doctored the audio so something that wasn't there sounded worse. They posted it online. The town watched, liked, laughed. The clip looped through phones and feeds with the merciless speed of a rumor. Teachers saw it and called it kids being kids. Counselors said resilience. Administrators assured us the school was handling it. The whole language of official response sounds like soft cloth you can put over a wound and pretend it's closed. It wasn't. The wound redrew itself every time someone refreshed a page. The day it broke into the daylight of my life, my phone rang at work. I remember the shape of the room. Fluorescent lights humming, the smell of sold air, and how my stomach dropped before I heard a single word. "Mr. Hayes?" the voice said. "It's the school nurse. Michael's upset. You should come." I left the truck running in the street. My hands smelled like grease and fear. When I arrived, he was sitting on the vinyl bench in a way that made my chest tighten. Head bowed, shoulders enclosing himself like armor. A teacher stood too close, trying to be helpful and failing. I asked what happened, and Michael's eyes flicked up, then away. He said, "It's nothing, Dad." He was the kind of son who folded the worst parts of himself inside and tied them with a ribbon so no one else would have to carry them. I wanted to rip that ribbon open for him. I wanted to tell them all, teachers, parents, the kids who filmed him, that no joke punches at the same place twice and walks away without consequences. But I didn't. I said the wrong things. I smiled. I told him to go home and rest. I told him to keep his head up. I told him to be resilient. The next day slipped like pages. He retreated into sketchbooks and camera parts. He stopped going out with friends. He stopped coming to the dinner table with the same half-smile. Once, I found his headphones on the kitchen counter and his eyes wet when he thought nobody was looking. I asked him to talk. He said, "It's fine, Dad." He lied because children sometimes protect parents the way parents fail to protect them. Out of love, out of stubbornness, out of not wanting to add weight to already heavy lives. One evening, he didn't come home from school. The principal called. The words the principal chose were clinical and careful. Troubled, incident, being looked into. As if varnish could hide what had snapped. I drove there in a blur, radio static and red lights painting the dash. The nurse met me in the hallway and took me to a small room where Michael sat on a cot, his face pale, his jaw clenched, like he'd learned to hold himself together one breath at a time. He avoided my eyes. He told me he'd be fine. I believed him because what else was there to do? That night, he left a voice message that I've played 1,000 times in the dark. I avoid saying the words out loud now because they make the air fall heavier. But those 3 lines are etched into me. Dad, I just wanted them to stop. The simplicity of it is what kills me. The way any child can believe cessation is the only cure. I listened to that message, and I felt something fracture inside me. A part of me that would have protected him if I'd recognized the signs, if I'd pushed harder, if I'd read the silence for what it was. I found the note folded in his desk drawer later. Not dramatic, no long explanation, no list of grievances. Just a small, trembling script. I just wanted the noise to stop. It read. I held that paper until my fingers went numb. I wanted to rage outward at the world. But more than that, I wanted to rage inward at my own cowardice. At every moment I chose comfort over confrontation. At the funeral, the town came in a thin, polite line. Faces that had watched the clip smiled like they were mourning. Faces that had bullied looked down at their shoes. Some said, "We're sorry," with mouths that didn't match their eyes. The principal offered condolences and promised investigations and meetings and programs. The language of repair sounded like a manual for moving on quickly. I kept thinking it was a manual for cover-up. That night, after the house settled into a silence that had nothing to do with sleep, I sat in Michael's room under the dim lamp and held his camera. I turned it over in my hands, like a relic, until the leather worn where his palm had been felt familiar. I whispered to the empty room, a vow that trembled but did not break. I will not let his voice be a footnote. I will not let them walk away with polite apologies and quiet lives. That night, I buried my son. But the voices never stopped. 10 years is supposed to dull the edges of grief. People say time softens the blow, that the memories fade until you can breathe again. They lie. Time doesn't heal. It only buries the wound under layers of routine until something, some sound, some scent, some voice, rips it open again. I live alone now. The house is smaller, quieter. I fix things for a living, wiring, switches, light fixtures. Yet I can't fix the silence. Every night at 9:13, the same minute Michael's message used to play on my old answering machine. The phone rings. No caller ID, no number, just that hollow tone before a voice comes through the static. Why did you let them hurt me, Dad? At first, I thought it was a cruel prank. Someone found a way to mimic his voice. Or maybe I'd lost my mind and started dreaming with my eyes open. I'd pick up, my throat burning, whispering his name as if the sound alone could bring him back. The voice would repeat the question, softer each time, until the line cut off with a faint click. Then silence. Always silence. I started unplugging the phone at night, but it didn't matter. The ringing would echo anyway, inside my head, through the walls, sometimes even when the power was out. Once, I threw the receiver across the room, but the sound still came, sharp as guilt, cruel as memory. Neighbors said I needed help. My sister convinced me to see a psychiatrist. The man's office smelled like antiseptic and unearned comfort. He asked if I'd been sleeping, if I blamed myself. I told him I didn't need therapy. I needed an answer. He scribbled something on a pad and called it hallucinations rooted in unresolved trauma. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was broken. But broken things still ring when you hit the right frequency. The night after that appointment, I sat in front of the old laptop I hadn't touched since Michael died. The password was still his birthday. The internet had changed, but the past doesn't really vanish. It just hides behind new links. I typed in his name. The search results were sterile. Old news articles, grief blogs, a few mentions of anti-bullying initiatives that fizzled after a year. Then I searched the names of the kids who'd made his life hell. One by one they appeared on my screen, each profile polished, each life shining. Derek, now a lawyer, defending corporations. Todd, a police officer, decorated for youth outreach. Carly, a therapist, preaching resilience on social media. They'd grown up, prospered, forgotten. They'd buried their sins under resumes and family photos, under smiles and Christmas cards and charity events. I scrolled through their lives, with a hand that trembled less from rage and more from disbelief. They had moved on. My son never could. I spent that week tracing their stories, bookmarking articles, saving images. Not out of obsession, I told myself, but out of duty. The phone kept ringing every night. The same question. Why did you let them hurt me? I began answering. Because I was afraid, son. Because I thought forgiving them would save us both. But the voice never replied. Just the click. I tried to find meaning in the noise. I'd play back the voicemails on speaker, record the sound, run it through filters on my computer. Sometimes I thought I heard other voices layered beneath. Laughter, faint and cruel. The kind that once echoed down school hallways. Maybe it was interference. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was guilt trying to teach me how to listen. One night, I didn't wait for the call. I picked up the receiver at 9:12 and said into the empty line, "I know you're there." The silence stretched long enough to make me doubt myself. Then the static shifted, and his voice came through. Different this time, lower, steadier. Not a child's ghost, but something older. Wiser. "You can still fix it, Dad." I froze. It wasn't an accusation anymore. It was an invitation. The words hit like a heartbeat after flatline. I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, breathing in the quiet, knowing what I had to do. The world outside kept moving, traffic humming, neighbors laughing, the news blaring about politics and success stories. But inside that house, everything stilled. 10 years of guilt had just turned into purpose. I whispered back, "Tell me how." But the line had already gone dead. That night, I didn't unplug the phone. I didn't hide from the ringing. I opened the box of old files, newspaper clippings, and printed screenshots I'd kept sealed under the floorboards. The faces stared back at me, smiling, unaware. I set them in a row, one by one, like a roll of film ready to be developed. The phone stayed silent for the rest of the night. But I knew it would ring again, and next time, I'd be ready to answer. I started like any man with too much guilt and too little hope. Slow, clumsy, afraid of making noise that might wake the town. But grief has a way of sharpening things. It made me methodical. It made me patient. It made me dangerous in the calmest possible way. The first step was cataloging names. I dug up old yearbooks from the attic, the ones I'd promised myself I'd never open because they held 1,000 small cruelties in glossy pages. There, between the football roster and the student council, I found them. Derek Harlan, Todd Brenner, Carly Reed, Mark Lewis. The faces that blurred together now had names. I wrote each down on a pad, and then I watched what the world had made of them. Derek, law firm partner, wedding photos on social media. Todd, promoted cop, smiling at community barbecues. Carly, licensed therapist, talking resilience on a local TV segment. Mark, town council member, championing youth programs. They wore success like armor. The people who watched Michael's clip and nodded along had moved into the kind of lives that make communities forgive themselves. I could have gone to the police then. I tried once. The response was as familiar as it was infuriating. There's no active investigation, no criminal charges were filed at the time. Their language was legalese, that means we have nothing to act on. But I had something pussyfooting around the edges. Small crumbs that, when assembled, made a trail. Old video files, a scratched CD someone had kept. Comments on a forgotten forum where a high school kid had mocked Michael and uploaded the footage. Those crumbs needed connecting. Finding the video was like pulling a thread from a sofa. Someone had uploaded a loop to a niche forum that disappeared if you blinked. The clip itself was rough, grainy, cell phone quality, but the content was unmistakable. Michael, cornered near the bleachers, forced to do something cruel. A chorus of laughter. The camera jerked as someone cheered. I watched it until the light over my workbench blurred into a halo. The timestamp matched the week I'd taken him to the dentist, and he'd seemed distracted. The location matched the old oak by the track. Proof, finally, though imperfect. I wasn't the man to run headlines. I knew nothing about shaping a narrative that would actually stick. That's where Anna came in. I found her through a byline, a hard-hitting reporter at the county paper who had written a series on failed anti-bullying programs. I emailed her a scanned clipping and a careful note, more pleading than explanation. She replied within hours, blunt and curious. "Meet me at 8. Bring whatever you have." We met in a coffee shop with paper cups and nervous lighting. She wore a plain coat and an expression like someone who had seen too many stories and still believed some of them mattered. Anna listened without interrupting. When I finished, she pushed over a recorder and asked simply, "Why now?" I put Michael's voice message on the table and let it play. The sound of his short sentence filled the tiny space between us. Anna's eyes grew wet, then sharp. "This isn't just a memory," she said. "This is a pattern. Help me find witnesses." We split work. She started following people, making discreet calls, finding old classmates who had left town or changed their names. I kept digging through physical archives, the yearbooks, the faded newspaper clippings, phone numbers scrawled on the margins of notes. In places you only find if you know where to look. Sometimes the trail went dead. Sometimes it led to a private Facebook page full of family photos and charitable events. Those curations were the kind of proof that looks clean on resume lines, but smells like ash if you stare long enough. One small breakthrough came from a person I hadn't expected, Sam, a janitor from the school who'd been quietly watching for years. He'd kept a box of old tapes he'd found in a storage closet during a renovation. "Thought the principal tossed 'em," he said, handing over a battered VHS. We converted it to digital. There was Michael, smaller than he'd been in my memory, and behind him, just for a second, the edge of a hoodie with a familiar logo. Mark Lewis's high school brand. It was a sliver, but in the slow work of assembling proof, a sliver can become a sword. Word spreads in strange ways. Anna ran a discreet background check on Derek and found a small discrepancy in billing at his firm. An invoice that suggested his office had been handling a hush matter years ago. She called the firm with the softest of probes. An assistant answered and, by mistake or courage, admitted they'd settled a harassment claim quietly because the client feared reputational damage. That's all we needed to call a lawyer friend of Anna's, someone who knew how to file a subpoena where it would hurt. We didn't slam doors open. We asked for records with the language courts understand and follow. The first public crack came in a mundane way. A local news item about a police officer suspended for misconduct. Todd Brenner's name flashed across the bottom ticker. His suspension was for unrelated charges, abuse of authority on a domestic call. But when Anna phoned the sheriff's department to confirm, an officer offhandedly mentioned Todd's history with the high school and a prior complaint that disappeared. I had not put that call in motion. Someone else had. My stomach dropped and then clenched with the cold thrill of success. Whoever had nudged that report, whether conscience or coincidence, had given us leverage. I will not pretend it was elegant. There were nights I wanted to quit, to fold the dog-eared clippings back into the boxes and pretend the ringing would stop. There were threats, too. Anonymous notes slipped under my door with words meant to slow me down. The first time I received one, "Leave it buried." I took it to Anna. She photographed it, turned it into a story question. Who benefits from silence? Her answer was always the same. The powerful. We needed a stage big enough to make silence impossible. The problem with revenge stories is not getting people to care. It's making care unavoidable. Mark Lewis's upcoming keynote at the community center, an event billed as part of a youth mental health initiative he'd promoted, looked like the perfect venue. He had built his public persona on protecting kids, the sort of performance that would have made my blood boil if it weren't for the fact that he was the man who'd helped break mine. The plan came together like a stubborn machine. Anna lined up the paper to run an in-depth feature timed with the event. Our lawyer drafted a demand to the school district for records, set to hit the same morning. I prepared a short statement to read if the chance presented itself. We weren't aiming to humiliate for sport. We wanted the town to see the work we'd done, names, dates, footage, past complaints, and to force institutions to act. 2 nights before the event, the phone rang as usual. Michael asked evenly, "Dad, are you ready?" The line hummed like an old amplifier. I could have laughed at the absurdity. Instead, I felt a weight settle in my chest. Like the moment before a long-held breath you know you cannot stop. I answered him honestly. No, I said, but I owe you this. That honesty steadied me. It mattered more than righteousness. It mattered more than headline glory. It was a promise I kept to the small, stubborn kid who made short films and kept his grief in a shoebox. On the morning of the keynote, the town smelled like rain and fried dough, normal things in a place that preferred normal to truth. The community center buzzed with volunteers and banners and cameras. Mark Lewis stepped up to the podium amid applause and polished smiles. He spoke about empathy and programs and the need to listen. He even mentioned resilience, how kids can overcome anything with community support. Anna's piece went live then, precisely timed. It rolled out online with a slow horror of inevitability. Interviews from former students, the digitized VHS clip, a scanned school log noting an incident that matched the date on my files. Comments ignited like tinder. Phones began to ring. The town's comfortable narrative cracked. We didn't shout. We presented. Evidence isn't loud. It's steady. The effect was crueler than shouting. When a community that has been complicit finally has the mirror held up, they stare in it until they see themselves. People started whispering in the aisles. A volunteer who'd stood on the sidelines all these years ducked her head. Mark's smile thinned. It was not my vengeance that felled them. It was the slow, patient truth. And when your daughter's boyfriend works at the paper, and your son is on a disciplinary record, and your name keeps appearing next to words like complaint and dismissed, reputation is paper thin. By noon, the town would be in pieces. By night, the first of them would be answering questions that had lain buried for a decade. I'd learned that revenge can be less about satisfying wrath and more about restoring balance. I had been given the phone calls, the sleepless years, and a son's last whispered plea. I would use them to make sure those voices, mine, his, and the ones who had been quieted, could not be ignored any longer. I stepped forward anyway. The carpet under my shoes muffled the sound, but the silence in the room made every step echo like a drumbeat. Rows of faces turned toward me. Parents, teachers, journalists, young volunteers with lanyards and idealistic smiles. I could see the confusion spreading like ripples. Mark Lewis's eyes found me halfway down the aisle. He didn't recognize me at first, not as the electrician who had once wired his office lights, not as the man whose son he'd helped destroy. He saw only disruption and intrusion into his perfect scene. "Sir, this is a closed," the moderator began, but I lifted my hand and spoke louder. "My son calls me every night." It wasn't a shout. It was steady, heavy. The kind of tone that makes people lean in without realizing it. The applause that had started for the speaker faltered. Cameras swiveled toward me. The moderator froze. Mark blinked, his smile uncertain now. "Excuse me?" he asked, forcing a chuckle. "I'm sorry, sir, do we?" "My son calls me every night," I said again. "He asks me the same question. Why did you let them hurt me?" The air shifted. A tremor moved through the crowd. Someone in the back stopped recording and just listened. I walked closer to the stage, pulling the small flash drive from my coat pocket. "I think you should answer him, Mr. Lewis," I said quietly. "Since you're talking about protecting our youth." Anna's camera was already rolling, broadcasting live to hundreds, soon thousands. I could see her in the corner, jaw tight, eyes locked on her monitor. Mark tried to keep his composure. "Sir, I don't know who you are, but you don't remember Michael Hayes?" I asked. 16. Loved film. You made him famous, didn't you?" A murmur ran through the audience. The name hung in the air, like smoke. Someone whispered it again, and suddenly it wasn't just a name. It It was history, unburied. Mark's color drained. "This is highly inappropriate," he said. "Security." Anna stepped forward, holding up her phone. "You might want to see this first," she said. And with a single tap, the screen behind the podium lit up. The projector flickered to life. A shaky old video filled the screen, grainy, time-stamped, familiar. The laughter hit first, a cruel teenage chorus. Then Michael's face appeared, framed in humiliation, cornered by boys whose faces blurred in motion. The camera panned, and for one clear second, paused on the smirk of a young Mark Lewis. The same jawline, the same eyes, just untouched by age and guilt. Gasps filled the room. The sound was small at first, then grew into a wave of disbelief and disgust. Some people turned away. Others stared as if they couldn't look away even if they wanted to. Mark moved quickly, his voice tight. "This is slander. You can't." But the words drowned under the growing murmur. Anna's live stream. Comments exploded on screen. "That's him. He's lying. What kind of man preaches youth protection after that?" Mark tried to cut the feed. "Turn that off," he barked. "This isn't verified." "Verified?" I said, my voice rising for the first time. "I've got the yearbook, the witness statements, the school logs that said incident resolved. You buried him once? You won't bury the truth." A reporter from the local TV station stood up, microphone trembling. "Mr. Lewis, do you deny that's you in the video?" Mark's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes darted from camera to camera, predator caught in the glare of his own lies. "I was a kid," he stammered finally. "We all did stupid things. Kids don't drive others to die," I said. "Adults who never learned right from wrong do." The moderator whispered into his mic, trying to calm the chaos. But the crowd had already turned. Phones were out, recording, streaming. The story had escaped the room. It was alive online now, multiplying faster than anyone could contain it. Anna held up another document. "This," she said, "is from a sealed school record detailing how the administration dismissed a complaint of harassment because the student's father was a major donor." She let the name drop like a hammer. That donor was Mark Lewis's father. The crowd gasped again. A new silence fell, thicker, uglier. Mark's mask cracked completely. He slammed a hand on the podium. "My father was a hard man," he said, the anger bleeding through. "He made me who I am. I learned how to fight back, how to survive." "And then you became him," I said softly. For a moment, everything stopped. The lights, the sound, the air itself seemed to freeze around that sentence. I took another step forward. "You could have ended the cycle. You could have been the kind of man my son might have trusted. Instead, you used pain like inheritance. You passed it down." Mark looked at me then. Really looked. And I saw something that wasn't just guilt, but recognition. The kind of recognition that happens when a mirror finally tells the truth. He tried to speak again, but the microphones picked up nothing but shallow breaths. Reporters crowded forward, questions shouted over one another. Anna turned her phone toward me, whispering, "You did it." I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, steady, tired. "I didn't do this for revenge," I said to the nearest camera. "I did it so no one else's child has to whisper from the dark, asking why no one stopped them." Mark stumbled off the podium. Security didn't move. They didn't need to. The crowd parted for him, not out of respect, but disgust. Outside, I could hear the distant echo of sirens, reporters, investigators, the inevitable storm. He reached the doors and turned once more, eyes wet, voice breaking. "You don't." know what he was like, he said, meaning his father, meaning the man who made him cruel. Maybe not, I replied, but I know what you became. I took the flash drive from the laptop and held it up, the single object that had dismantled everything he'd built. You destroyed my son to feel powerful, I said quietly. Now you'll live powerless. Anna caught the moment. The crowd, the silence, the truth laid bare. Within minutes, the video spread across social media, the comments pouring in faster than we could read them. The truth didn't need me anymore. It had its own voice now. Mark Lewis's name was no longer followed by congressman or advocate. It was followed by one word repeated over and over again: bullying. I left the hall without looking back. Cameras flashed, questions followed, but I kept walking. Outside, the air was cold and clear, and for the first time in a decade, the phone in my pocket didn't ring. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't demand an answer. Weeks passed, and the noise finally settled into something quieter, not silence, but a softer kind of sound. The world had moved on to the next scandal, the next story, but in our small town, echoes lingered. Mark Lewis resigned 3 days after the broadcast. His statement was short. I take full responsibility for my past actions. The words sounded practiced, but the tremor in his voice was not. An internal investigation opened into the school district, and old files began surfacing like ghosts pulled from shallow graves. Former students came forward. Apologies arrived in letters, in phone calls, in awkward encounters at the grocery store. None of it changed what had happened, but for the first time, people stopped pretending it hadn't. The community center where he'd spoken now had a small memorial, a plaque by the door that read, "In memory of Michael Hayes," a voice that was silenced, now heard. Someone left flowers there every morning. I never asked who. Maybe it was Anna. Maybe someone who had once laughed and finally understood the cost of that laughter. I went back to work quietly, fixed wires, changed light bulbs. When people recognized me, they didn't know what to say. Sometimes they nodded. Sometimes they just stood there, unsure if gratitude and guilt could coexist in a single sentence. At home, the house felt lighter. The air didn't hum with that phantom ringing anymore. The phone sat on the counter, still and silent. I caught myself glancing at it each night, waiting. But the silence stayed. That evening, I stood in Michael's room. Dust drifted through the last light of the day. His old camera sat on the shelf where I'd left it years ago. I picked it up, thumbed the worn button, and smiled faintly at the soft click of the shutter. "You can rest now, son," I whispered. There was no reply. Only the sound of the wind through the trees outside, like a breath exhaled after a long, painful pause. Justice didn't bring him back, but it brought peace. And what happened in the end will leave you speechless.